Hello, I'm Barry Daniel, and this is the podcast of the Middle Way Society. Our aim is to encourage a universal approach to living a more integrated, ethical life, avoiding dogma or any appeal to authority. My guest today is Dr. Vinh Tho, who is the Programme Director of the Gross National Happiness Centre in Bhutan, and he's here to talk to us about the project, its underlying philosophy, how it's applied, the challenges it faces, and how it might relate to the middle way. Hello, Tho. Welcome to the MWS podcast.
Thank you, and thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be online with you.
Great. Okay, well, could you start off by telling us something about your background and how you got involved with the G&H project?
Sure. So I'm half Vietnamese, half French. My father was Vietnamese and my mother French.
Yeah.
So I grew up in two continents, Europe and Asia. And I'm from the generation of the Vietnam War. So, the awareness of the war was very strong in my life. Most of my career I did in the social field and also in academia, but mainly in the social field. And my last position before going to Bhutan, I was the Director of Learning and Development for the International Committee of the Red Cross.
Okay. Which
is the part of the Red Cross, Red Crescent movement that works in war zones, in conflict areas. So I was in this position for about 7 years, and during the 7 years I traveled most of the conflict zones and war zones of our time, from Afghanistan to Darfur and from Palestine to Ivory Coast. And what really struck me, witnessing firsthand wars and conflicts and a lot of suffering, was several things. The first one was that I had the feeling, as a humanitarian worker, we were never really addressing the root causes of the conflicts.
Yeah.
I was very much aware that the violence that I was witnessing, the violence, the armed conflicts, the tremendous suffering, was just like the tip of the iceberg. And I felt more and more that the actual root causes were an underlying systemic violence or structural violence that was ingrained in the current system, especially the current economic system.
Okay.
So that was a very strong insight and a strong sort of challenge for me. How do I continue from there on? I'm not saying that humanitarian work is not useful and necessary. It definitely is. But again, it's always too late. It comes once the conflicts have erupted. So I was really trying to reflect on how could we more prevent conflicts. And I had the feeling that, the usual kind of peace work or peace dialogue and also didn't really address the root causes. And because I realized that I saw the root causes in two different dimension. One was the economic dimension, so that the economic system has an ingrained violence by the way it's conceived, with huge inequality and, this cutthroat competition and so on. And the other cause was the destruction of the environment. Mm-hmm. Because I really witnessed, for instance, in Darfur, how the war was a direct consequence of the climate change affecting the population in these areas. So I was wondering how could I have a more direct impact on these two issues. And that's how I came to learn about gross national happiness as an alternative development paradigm.
Okay. And when you say in Darfur the wars were a direct a consequence of climate change, are you saying they were fighting over a resource like water or something like that?
Yes, basically over water. Because if you look at the Darfur conflict, of course, as all conflicts, it's complex and it has various political and power struggle elements. But fundamentally, it's about two populations that are sharing a resource that is becoming scarce and less and less, which is water. One of the population being a nomad population, and the other one being farmers.
Right.
So both farmers and nomads with their cattle need water. The water is becoming less, and the population is growing, the competition is getting very fierce, and they used to fight it out with sword and spears, but now they fight it out with modern weapons, when that's the other side of, modern weapon industry being more than happy providing everyone with very sophisticated modern weapons. So that the consequence was over 2 million people died in this conflict.
Wow. Yeah. So in a sense, you could see this as an ominous sign of potential future wars, that this is maybe just the start with what's happening in Darfur then.
Yes, definitely, because until now, most of the wars of the recent decades were over a resource like oil, right? And if you look at the oil map and the war maps, they pretty much coincide.
Yeah.
And they're very violent. I mean, look at Iraq and Syria and so on and so forth. This is all oil wars. These are oil wars. But it's difficult to live without oil, but you can live without oil. But you cannot live at all without water. And so when water becomes, a limited resources, then the intensity of the fighting and the struggles will become much worse, because people know they cannot survive without water.
Right, yeah, of course. Okay, well, before we look at the project itself, what do you understand by the term happiness, and how does it differ, say, from goodness, well-being, or flourishing?
Well, the term happiness, the way it's used in the context of GNH, or gross national happiness, is not only the superficial feel-good mood that we often associate with that term, right? Because obviously these moods are passing. You might be, happy one moment and sad the next. So of course that's not something that can be a goal of development. When we speak of happiness in the context of GNH, we speak basically of the relationship or of a human being being in touch or connected or in harmony, first of all, with themselves.
Okay.
Right. So really having this deeper relationship with oneself, not only the superficial consumerist approach to what we are, but really the more deeper levels of meaningfulness and so on. So being in touch with oneself is the first element. The second element is being in touch with others and with our society. The current economic system actually promotes a view of the human being as a purely rational, self-serving, egoistic individual who only wants to maximize his own profit with as little effort as possible. Well, this person, or this kind of view of human being, is completely antisocial. While we know from experience and we know from research that, for instance, being altruistic, being compassionate, having good human relationships and so on is a very important part of our happiness and well-being. So the second level is being in harmony with others. So being in harmony with oneself, being in harmony with others. And the third level is being connected or being in harmony with nature and the environment. Because again, the terrible situation of ecological situation of the world is, I believe, very much connected to the fact that so many people have lost touch with nature and the environment as a living entity. So happiness from this point of view is not, again, just a superficial feeling, but it's really this deep being grounded in this threefold connection with oneself, with others, and with nature.
So it's moving from a model of us as seen as Homo Economicus to Homo Empathicus.
Absolutely. The Homo Economicus is really this kind of understanding of the human being is, I believe, one of the big sources of suffering and conflicts in our time. Because promoting, including through the educational system, this kind of attitude of competition, of always wanting to be upfront, of disregarding the interest of others, is a recipe for unhappiness and suffering.
Okay. Just one final question on this, though. But what about sadness, for example? If a loved one or a close friend of mine died, not only would I be sad, but I would want to be sad too. I mean, how does that fit into this paradigm?
Happiness from this point of view is not the emotional state that is the polarity with sadness. Actually, happiness in a deeper sense includes sadness, includes all of human emotions. The question is, when we experience suffering, sadness, and so on, is it something that is destroying us, or is it an experience out of which we learn and grow?
Yeah.
So it's not about avoiding, sadness or all the other challenges that we face as human beings, and trying to promote a kind of unrealistic state of constant happiness. I mean, or constant well-being. It's not like we want to be high on some kind of drug that makes us constantly, smiling and floating around, but it's really fully experiences the wholeness of our human experience in a meaningful way. And grieving in a meaningful way is really a source of humanity, and therefore of happiness in the deeper sense.
Sure, yeah. Okay. So how did the concept of gross national happiness first come about?
Well, it's a very interesting story, because it was the fourth king of Bhutan who ascended the throne as a very young man. He was only 17 years old, because his father died at a young age. And he had been exposed to Western cultures. He had been traveling, and he of course knew also the neighboring countries like India and Nepal and so on. And he was asking himself, well, what should be the guiding star, if you want, or the guiding line of my reign? And he really thought, well, actually, because it was at a moment where Bhutan was just opening up to the rest of the world. He had been very, very close until then. And he said, yes, we need to modernize, we need to develop, we need to grow, but in such a way that it is centered around the happiness and well-being of our people, and not at any cost, because he saw also the negative impact it had on many other countries, so-called developing countries. And so he came up with this a very simple sentence, where he said, the first time he mentioned it, he said, gross national happiness is more important than gross national product. So now we usually say gross inland product, but it's the same thing, right? It's gross. So the fundamental idea is that yes, development is important, progress is important, but it's not centered around growth itself. Economy and growth is not an aim in itself. It's just a mean, and a mean to serve another end. And the end is to promote happiness and well-being, not only for human beings, but for all beings, because it's a Buddhist country, and the idea is that well-being is not only for humans, also for animals, for nature, and so on. So that's how it started. And it was just a vision, really. It was just sort of a vision. And that was in the early 70s, so a long time ago.
Yeah.
And then ever since, there was the question, so, okay, that sounds good, it's a beautiful idea, but how do you implement that?
Yeah.
And so the path Bhutan has been going ever since this first idea of gross national happiness was, so how do you make something practical out of it? How do you, govern a country with this vision?
And how has that panned out?
Well, gross national happiness can be seen as four different things, four different dimensions. Okay. The first one is it's an alternative development paradigm.
Yeah.
So it's a strategy, if you want, a development strategy that says development, yes, growth, yes, economic progress, yes, but as a mean to serve the well-being of people and nature. So that's the first dimension. It's a strategy, it's a vision, it's an ideal.
Yeah.
The second level is, well, if you want to go in this direction, then you have to be able to be sure you're going in the right direction. So you need some measurements.
Yeah.
So gross national happiness is an index and a measurement tool that not exactly replaces, but enlarges the usual tool, which is GDP measurement, which is only measuring economic activity. And it includes measuring economic activity, but it also includes measuring all other factors that will bring either something positive or negative to the country and society and environment. So it's a measurement tool, it's a measurement index, it's a survey that is done regularly. That's the second level. The third level is it's a screening tool used by the government to ensure that all the projects, laws, or other activities of the government actually do promote G&H values rather than destroy them. So it's a screening tool, a monitoring tool. And fourthly, it's a change in consciousness, in mindset, because things like consumerism are really, it's an inattitude. So it needs education. So it's and this is what we are doing at the G&H Center. We are developing programs, we're working in the schools with the youth to try to promote other values and another attitude to life than just consumerism as a goal of life.
And you emphasize that Bhutan is not a Shangri-La. How successful has the project been there so far? And what do you see as the greatest challenges it faces within the country?
Well, I think it's one should be realistic about it. You cannot expect Bhutan to be sort of a G&H island in a world of GDP.
Yes.
So of course, Bhutan is exposed to international pressure. It's part of the UN. It's part of the World Bank. It's part of World Monetary Fund and so on. And so of course it has to somehow adapt to the reality of our time. It's also very dependent on India because it sells, most of the incomes comes through selling electricity to India through the hydropower. And things like that. So it has constantly, it's walking on a tightrope, trying on one hand to promote these values, to develop Bhutan in such a way that its environment is preserved, its culture is preserved, its value is preserved, that it doesn't fall in the extreme of consumerism and materialism and destroying the environment and so on. But on the other hand, it's not easy at all because there are all kind of international pressures and so some of the challenges are, for instance, let me give you a practical example. Bhutan has been extremely successful in developing a educational system almost from scratch. A couple of decades ago, the only schools were monastic schools.
Right.
And Bhutan managed to develop a full-fledged educational system from primary school all the way to university. It's 100% free. So it has a lot of merits, and now 100% of children are going in schools. Even children living in remote villages are going to school.
Fantastic.
So that's a great achievement.
Yeah.
Now the downside of it, or the problem that arises, is that so many kids have been educated and they don't necessarily want to stay back in the farm.
Yeah.
So suddenly you have a new problem that was totally unknown, which is youth unemployment. Right, you see, so these are always the thing. You develop something that is, of course, positive, and who would say that developing education is negative? Of course, it's positive, but it also brings problems that are new and that were unheard of just a generation ago.
Sure, and the world advertising industry spends billions on tempting us in many ways, and I'm sure, I would imagine, with television, and are kids now getting access to the internet in Bhutan? I mean, would that be having an effect too?
Definitely. Television only started in, I think, 1999 or something like that. So relatively recently. Until there was no television.
Yeah.
And internet came later, but now is very widespread. And many, many young people have access to internet. And again, you cannot prevent people. You should not prevent people because you want to respect their freedom, and it's their right to want to, be open to the world and know what's going on in the world and so on. But at the same time, you need to support them in being true to their values, to their cultures, and seeing the beauty of what they have, and not being totally sort of fascinated, almost hypnotized by, this kind of illusion of American way of life, the way it appears in series and stuff like that. So it's not easy. It's not easy.
Yeah. In many ways, Bhutan has been an experiment for the world because my understanding is that up to now, it's the only country that has actually adopted such a different economic paradigm. To what degree do you think the rest of the world is becoming receptive to the idea, though? To what degree have you made an impression on the rest of the world, do you think?
I think in the past, I would say 3-4 years, the situation has changed. I would say that maybe 5-6 years ago, when people spoke about gross national happiness, it was just like people would smile, it's, oh, come on, I mean, be serious. And, it seemed like a utopia, something completely unrealistic. And it has changed. In 2011, Bhutan submitted a motion at the UN General Assembly called Happiness and Well-being Towards a New Development Paradigm. This motion was adopted, and the government of Bhutan was asked to convene an international high-level meeting in April 2012. It had happened with heads of state, many ministers, representatives of most international agencies were there, yep, as well as a lot of scientists, because the other side to it is that there's a lot of scientific evidence now showing both on a macro level and also on individual level the importance of happiness and well-being for the development of society. So there's two things. One is that what used to be kind of a dream now is supported by a lot of scientific evidence, including very well-known Nobel Prize people like Joe Stiglitz, Economy Nobel Prize and others. That's one side. So there's scientific evidence that shows that, yes, there's a real argument for this kind of approach. The second reason is that since latest 2008, we know that our economic system, the current economic system, is extremely fragile and could collapse anytime. We know from all the reports that have been scientifically based that the situation of the environment, climate change and pollution and so on, is critical. Therefore, now more and more people wake up to the fact that change has to come. And GNH is one of the options. I'm not saying it's the solution, but I'm saying it's one of the contributions to show, well, maybe we could rethink what we mean by development and progress.
My last question, Tho, what is your understanding of the middle way, and how does it relate to what we've been talking about today?
Well, as you, of course, are well aware of, the middle way is a central concept in the Buddhist philosophy and Buddhist approach. Yeah. And GNH, although it's a secular approach, it's not a religious, it's not Buddhist, but of course it's been very strongly influenced by Buddhist views because it's born out of a Buddhist context. Yeah. And therefore, the idea of a middle way, a middle path, is very central to the approach of GNH, because one of the first expression of the middle way in the Buddha's teaching was the middle way between extreme asceticism and fully indulging in sensual pleasures. And GNH is promoting exactly that. It's not about completely renouncing consumption and going back to cave age or something, Stone Age, but it's having, yes, taking the best of what modernity and science and progress has to offer, but in a very reasonable, in a very moderate way, so that we preserve the environment and we preserve the future, our planet for future generations. So that's an example. It's also not about closing Bhutan away and, just trying to be completely closed and just doing our own thing. It's also not about completely opening up and just taking in Western and American culture, but again finding a middle way where, yes, you are open to modern input, foreign input, but you want at the same time to preserve your own culture, your own specificity. Another example of the middle way is, it's not about asking everyone to become a monk and renouncing worldly pleasures or something like that, but it's finding a balance between what you request for yourself and what you're willing to do for your society. So a middle way between individualism and communitarism, or I'm not sure what the word is, just being there for the community. Yeah. So these are just examples. So I think that GNH is very much about middle path or middle way.
Yeah, well, that makes very much sense to me, Tho. Well, anyway, thank you very much for talking to me today. It's been a real pleasure, and the best of luck with the project.
Thank you very much.
You can find out more about Middle Way philosophy at www.middlewaysociety.org.